Hi, welcome back to the shed for episode 38 of GGBO 2023, and in this episode we're finally going to get around to starting the finishing process on this guitar. So in the last episode we did quite a lot of work getting a few little odd jobs sorted out that were holding the build back. I'm happy that they've all worked. I'm pretty confident that we are where we need to be with this build now before we can get the finishing done. So once again I need to get everything stripped off the guitar, and then we can start with all the finish prep. I've been trying to do it as I go along, so most areas have had the rough sanding done and we just probably need to go down a couple of more grades just to get where we need to be before we can put some finish on. But there are some rough areas, especially where we put this new heel transition in, that does need quite a little bit of work before we can call that ready to go. But the first step in all of that is to once again strip everything off the guitar, and I seem to have been doing this a lot over the last few weeks, but I would much rather spend the time going backwards and forwards than get the finish on it and realise that we have to do some major rework. But I'm just totally bored with taking these springs in and out. Now, I had a comment on the last video, and I'm sorry I've forgotten the commenter's name, but basically they were saying that it seems as if I've kind of fallen out of love with this build a little bit, or I'm not kind of enjoying it as much as other builds that I've done in the past. I don't think that's the case, and if that's the impression I'm giving, I apologise. I think this job has gone on a lot longer than I ever thought it would, so that probably isn't helping matters. It had become apparent a long time before I missed the deadline for GGBO 2023 that I wasn't going to hit it, so that's probably not helped either, and I think that actually dragged the job out longer than it should have done as well, because once the urgency had gone to get it done for a specific date, any residual urgency kind of went along with it, which isn't great because I've got another build to do on a deadline for Jörg's Cup kind of in the next few months. So by this one taking as long as it has, I've kind of put myself under a lot of pressure with that one as well, and it really does mean quite a lot to me to get that build finished for the deadline, because some of you might not be aware, but Jörg's was someone I considered to be a really good friend, and I still miss him a lot. So to kind of honour his memory properly, I really do want to take part in that build competition to my fullest extent. I don't care about winning it, that's not what it's about, but I think it is something I should take quite seriously and make a real concerted effort to get it done in time. So to that end, we need to crack on and get this finished. So I'm going to strip the rest of this down very, very quickly, and then we can start to look at what we need to do to get the finishing underway. So the last bit to come off is the nut, and that is just held on by these two screws. I had another comment, and again, I can't remember who said it, so apologies for that. But they were basically saying that they much prefer the kind of genuine Floyd Rose style nut that bolts in through the back of the neck, so it's actually bolted right the way through. because what they've experienced in the past with this type of nut where it screws in from the top is that, I'm not quite sure how, but they were saying that they've experienced movement in the nut, and over time that has kind of worked these screws loose, and it just kind of adds to the instability of the tuning, etc. I'm not quite sure I understand how that movement comes in. I'm not saying it doesn't. My experience of these things is quite limited. This is the first time I've used such a thing. This one's actually screwed down quite tightly, so it might be that they've experienced the holes that it's screwed into were slightly oversized, so the screws aren't gripping as well as they could. It's a possibility. I'm not particularly worried about it at this point. I might be proved wrong. This nut fits very tightly to the fingerboard, so that's going to limit the movement. It means there's only ever going to be the ability to move one way, and that's backwards. So I'm hoping that that won't be an issue. I have seen the nuts that are bolted through from the other side. I must say I don't like the look of those two bolts on the back of the neck. Looks ugly in my opinion, but of course we do need to consider functionality over form sometimes as well. That'll be interesting to see how this copes with a few years use, whether this becomes an issue or not. But for the time being, it's off, so we can concentrate now on getting some finish prep done. And I'm going to start very quickly by going back to this heel area, because I think there are a couple of bits that need a little bit of finessing beyond sanding. Now, the first one is just this transition here, which I think is a little bit too sharp. So I'm going to take a bit more material out of there just to blend that in a bit nicer. And I still feel there's a bit of a hump here that we need to take out. So this one's fairly straightforward. Again, I'm just going to carve some of that out with a chisel until I get a much nicer, flatter radius through that transition. And I'll just kind of take out some of the lumpiness on that radius on the top as well. And straight away, I think that's an awful lot better. So I think a bit of filing and maybe a bit of card scraping through that area will get us to a position where we can just sand that now, and that will be good. I'm not sure here, because this is already actually quite flat. I'll just try and take a little bit more out the little spoon gouge. Just to take that hump out. I think that's pretty much done it. So now I can just see if I can just neaten that up with a scraper. And we'll be somewhere close to getting this sanded. Okay, so that's that heel area now sanded to about 80 grit, and there's a little bit of fine sanding to do, but we're pretty much there shape wise. So I'm going to leave that for the time being and I'm going to move on and start doing the back of the body wings and the back of the body. And I've literally just got an 80 grit pad on here and just start sanding it. Now this area in the centre is quite good, so a quick sand over should get us pretty much where we need to be with it. But this top wing on the back is actually quite rough. I could have done a much better job of sanding this before I glued it on, but I didn't, so now I've got a little bit of work to do. So I'll concentrate on that area and get that as good as the rest of the back of the guitar, and then we can move on and start working our way through the grits. Okay, so that's virtually the whole of the back of the guitar now sanded to 120, and it is feeling an awful lot better, a lot smoother, especially around this transition area. I've had to really kind of pay attention and sand right into that corner because there was a little bit of squeeze out still showing, so I've had to do quite a bit of work in there, but it's come really nice now, and I'm generally very happy with it. So I'm going to continue off camera doing the back of the neck, back of the headstock and everything. I'll get that to about 220 grit, and then I'll join you back once we start doing a few little bits and bobs to the front and the sides. Okay, so that's the back and the back of the neck and the headstock all sanded up now to 220 grit. So it's feeling really nice and smooth and lovely. So I'm going to turn it over now and we can turn our attentions to the top and the sides. Now I don't think there's a huge amount to do on those because I've kind of given those a good sanding already. So I think they just need a bit of a clean up, get rid of all these laying out pencil marks and everything. Apart from that, should be quite straightforward. Okay, so that's the sanding pretty much done. We're down to 240 grit all over the body. Couldn't find no 220. There's one little last job that I need to do before I start the grain filling, and that is on this bit of the route here. You might just be able to see there's a little bit of maple. Now on the opposite side, it's mahogany, and it just looks uneven. So I'm going to take a chisel and I'm going to very delicately just take that little bit of maple out of there. I know it's only a very tiny little detail, but I think it would look kind of unbalanced if I left that white when the other one isn't. That's better. So with that out of the way, I'll get this turned over and I can start doing the grain filling. Now there's a lot of mahogany accents in the stripiness of this guitar, and it could be an idea to actually grain fill all of that. But what I've got planned for this guitar is The back and around the sides I'm going to do in a satin finish, because that will give me a smoother feel, which will kind of tie in with the shredder nature of this guitar. It will mean the neck should be slightly faster playing, feel a bit slicker under my hand. But the top and the front of the headstock are going to be high gloss. However, I just don't think, for the little bit of mahogany that's showing on the top of there, it's really worth going to all the bother of grain filling. And the other problem with that is, if I put grain filler onto the mahogany, it might have an impact on the staining, which I am going to do on this guitar. So I'd rather not risk it. So I'm just going to stick with doing these big areas on the wings, on the back and around the sides. And as is the case in the last few guitars I built, I'm going to be using some aqua coat to do the grain filler. I really like this stuff. It's water-based, it's quick drying. You can get a few coats on really quickly. And it doesn't really make a huge amount of mess. And all of those things are good things in my book. I think around some parts of here it's going to be inevitable that I'll get a little bit on to some of the maple. I'm fairly sure that will wipe off, and with a light sand you'll never know it was there. So I'm going to carry on and just get the rest of this first coated, and I'm probably going to leave it overnight because it is getting quite late in the evening now, just to dry up properly, and we can give it a quick sand back in the morning and apply the second coat. So it's the next morning. I actually got a chance to nip out last night and put a second coat of aqua coat onto this because the telly was rubbish. So I just used the opportunity to kind of move this a little bit further on. So we're ready to move on to the next step, which is just to kind of flat this down. It won't need much. I've got a 320 disc here, and I'm just going to do it very quickly by hand. But it doesn't need a lot. It just needs basically any little grain that's been raised, any bits of dust that have got trapped in there. We just need to nib them off and smooth it back down again. And it will take literally a couple of minutes to do. And then this element will be ready for finish. But before I do that, I just want to talk about another aspect of the build that I haven't really discussed yet, and that is what I'm going to do with regard to the kind of finish and colours, etc. Now, I think there's enough going on with this guitar as it is. There's plenty of interest with the stripiness down the centre. We've got some flamey veneer on, so that should come up. So I'm going to keep it quite simple, and my plan at the moment is all of the white maple, which is a bit too bright and glaring for me, is going to get stained to an amber. And I've got a little bit of a test there. That might look a little bit dark because this board wasn't particularly sanded very finely. So I think more stain has gone into that than will when we do this. So I want to do most of it with the amber. And then I've got another couple of stains that I'm thinking of using. I've got some mango, which is kind of a slightly kind of more orange colour than the amber, and to put a bit of that on. And then I've got some blood orange, which is quite a bit more orange than the amber. And what I intend to do is to do a quite delicate burst with the amber and the blood orange. It won't be very defined at all. It won't be a big burst. And then potentially, if I feel it's necessary, I might just put a little shadow of black around the outside, but I won't really know if that's kind of going to be an appropriate thing to do until I'm a little bit further on in the process. So the next stage in this is to get the stain onto it. Let me know in the comments what you think about my plan for the staining. I'm pretty sure that will divide opinions. It usually does, but I just think that this plain whiteness is just too much, and it does need something just to give it that little bit of a boost. Hopefully it doesn't ruin all that hard work. I'm not sure if there's enough material on this veneer left to sand it out again, but I'm sure there is enough that if it's too dark, we can lighten it up where we need to. So I'll be back in a couple of days' time when we'll get all of that underway. Until then, don't forget to hit the like button if you've enjoyed this, subscribe if you haven't already done so, and I'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.